for starting a little late. I was in Budget Committee, which in fact is still meeting, so we're going to, Mr. Bob Blumenfield will come shortly after the committee is adjourned. But I want to thank Mr. O'Farrell for being here. Thank you very much, sir. And welcome to the E&E Committee. I have two cards for public comment, so why don't we just ask those folks to come forward. Spindler and Herman, are you here? Armando Herman and Mr. Spindler, do you want to come up front? You have a minute each.
So once again, we just got done on the other committee dealing with you supporting the bank, Wells Fargo, that supports the terrorism against Native Americans. Now we get this other thing, the Owens. When are you going to clean it up? What has it been, 30, 40 years? See, because what you did is you took a nice thing and you took all the water out of it, and then you made a dust bowl. So how do I fix a dust bowl? Oh, I don't know. I'm the city of Los Angeles. We got a police department, just goes and shoots and beats anybody they want. Then we go and support banks. Then we got Aliso Canyon. This city is the #1 contributor to environmental disasters in the United States. So on behalf of everybody that's a victim, fuck you.
Thank you, Mr. Spindler. Armando Herman?
Yes, the budget meeting was great. We had that big, long discussions with the so-called pipeline running north and south. Another fiasco of trouble. Thank you, Wells Fargo. But it wasn't a very pleasant conversation there, as most of the Native Americans were on our side very upset due to the harm of our so-called wetlands, our land, and the Native American land. So, but here in the Owens Valley, of course, yeah, like Wayne Spindler said for the record, why did you create a dust bowl? Why weren't you taking any action to create wells and build some areas of moving water around, as opposed to flushing it all the way south to Mexico as an experiment with stupid, dumbass scientists? Yes, fuck you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Clerk, there are no more cards on this item, so we're going to close public comment on this item, as well as general public comment. So there you are. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and get started because I don't believe the Budget Committee has adjourned yet. So let that be noted. Mr. Blumenfield will join us shortly. Mr. O'Farrell, the reason I called for this special meeting of the Energy and Environment Committee was because I was notified, I don't know about yourself, late Thursday afternoon regarding a proclamation of a local emergency because of rain related to the damage in Inyo Canyon in the Owens Valley. Our office tried to get additional information all of Thursday and Friday, and we were unable to obtain the information that we needed. I don't believe this committee has been briefed properly. I don't know if you were extended that the same gesture to try to get information, or if you were provided with any additional information. I know I wasn't as the chair of the committee. Therefore, that's why we are here, to get additional information from the department, and moving forward, what is it that we are going to do to remedy the miscommunication, and how we, I believe, as a council need to be updated and briefed on these matters moving forward. So I'd like to invite Mr. Wright to come up to the table and give us a background as to what the intent of this proclamation was, and give us a proper briefing, because we haven't received one. Go ahead.
And very much apologize for any lack of briefing or information that wasn't provided prior to the meeting, the proclamation today at 11:45. I'll give some briefing and then I'll turn it over to Senior Assistant General Manager Rich Harisick, who oversees our water system. There's a page, and actually it's behind the cameraman right here, that I'd like to...
Is it also the part?
Yeah, sorry, it's the one...
Mr. Cameraman, you're messing with the props, our visuals, sir. Sorry to call you out that way, but that's how we do it around here.
Apologize, but it's the weighted average
we
of
go.
Owens Valley snow courses.
And is that
it's
part of the
in
handout as
top
well?
Corner
Got it, okay.
here. What you can see is until the end of December, so basically until the end of 2016, the snow was tracking 2 years ago, which was our driest year on record, in the water that eventually reaches the LA Aqueduct. And within the last 10 to 12 weeks, we've gone from essentially the driest year on record to the wettest year on record. And that has made some challenges, especially within the last few weeks, as we've gone from, not too far above average, which was that middle black dotted line, to just well above the wettest year we've had. We have invested by agreement over the last 17 years about $1.1 to $1.2 billion in dust mitigation efforts in the Owens dry lake bed. It is essentially a salt flat, and it's an area because of that does get dust. We made an agreement, and we've made all these investments in ways to reduce the dust blow off, which reduces the air quality for the people that breathe up there. Because it's happened very quickly, we've started looking at the amount of water that will run off, and Rich will get into a lot of the details, but there's basically 200,000 acre feet of water which will run into the lake bed and has the potential to significantly damage or destroy 17 years worth of dust mitigation efforts, which will take a lot of time and money to replace, and during that time the air quality will be significantly reduced. I shouldn't say it will be reduced, the air quality will. And so this is kind of an unusual emergency declaration because it's essentially being asked before the fact so that we can do the work that needs to be done before all the runoff starts. And this emergency declaration essentially allows us to bypass the normal, more lengthy purchasing process so that we can get basically start that mitigation as soon as possible to direct the water around this mitigation efforts, this investment that's occurred, so that we can get on top of that, create some as much as we can to again retain that $1.2 billion of investment that creates the better air quality, and then some of the money can also be utilized for the aqueduct and making sure it's completely continues to operate effectively, because there's going to be more runoff there than has occurred in almost any year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich to go into a little bit more of the detail with what's happening.
Good afternoon. I'll be referring to the same handout that we have here. Maybe we'll start on the back side, the back left, where we
Which one are you referred to?
the same sheet,
okay.
But the back side and the bottom left, there's a bar chart there. So we are at 2.5 times the normal amount of snow that we would have this time of year. And what that means is once that snow melts and we get the remaining rain in this winter year and runoff year, we'll have 1 million acre feet of water. And what that means is the maximum amount that we can take to the city of Los Angeles, and really the amount we actually drank last year, is just half of that. So 500,000 acre feet is all we can take down. So that leaves 500,000 that's going to stay up in the valley. Now, we normally spread water and provide water for environmental mitigation purposes under agreements and orders that we've collected in the past decades. And we will continue to irrigate those areas. We also provide water for our ranch lessees up in the Owens Valley, and they'll get their full allotment and then some. And then we'll do extra spreading in the Owens Valley to recharge our groundwater basin. So despite all those efforts of doing everything we can in the city to take water, and those are some extraordinary efforts in and of themselves, and I'll go over them real shortly. We're going to forego as much purchased water from the Metropolitan Water District as we can, so we'll get higher quality, cheaper water from our own aqueduct and maximize that. Probably about 75% of the water that DDP consumers will drink this year will be aqueduct water, and we've had to make certain system changes to be able to spread water throughout the city. We're looking to work with the county to spread water in the San Fernando Valley and possibly give water to other agencies as well to put to beneficial use. But back up to the valley, we're going to do everything we can to put the water to beneficial use, but as David said, that'll still leave 200,000 acre-feet of water, which is a tremendous amount of water. It's probably 2/5 of what the city can consume in a year. Will end up flowing down the Owens River into Owens Lake. The geography of the Owens Valley is such that Owens Lake is the lowest spot. It's really the Pacific Ocean, if you will, where all water ends up in the Owens Valley. So despite all our efforts to try to put that water to beneficial use, it'll end up on Owens Lake. So the issue with that is, as David mentioned, is that since 1998, when we signed an agreement that we were responsible to mitigate the dust on Owens Lake because of our water diversion activities that began in 1913, we accepted responsibility for all the dust that comes off of Owens Lake. And we've put on dust control measures to the tune of over $1 billion in capital expense out there. And if you flip that chart over and you see a depiction of the lake there, in the tan area and all those areas that are polygons that have numbers and letters with them, those are all discrete cells of dust control measures, and that covers about 50 square miles just in the areas that are bounded by the numbers and the polygons there. The blue and purple in the middle depicts different elevations of the existing brine pool that's in the lake. So the pink area is where there's water now. The darker blue is if 100,000 acre-feet come into the lake. That's how it'll spread out to. The light blue is if 200,000 acre-feet come in. So you can see that footprint of either the dark blue or the light blue is now encroaching on dust control areas, and that's where we would expect to see damage. And the damage would be in terms of berms and roads. We have managed vegetation areas out there. We have piping network. We have communication cables. We have power cables, pumping stations. And so either or all of those elements will likely get damaged. So the proclamation seeks, as David said, to be able to quickly procure materials, equipment, and services to help us respond to any damage, as well as to get ahead of it and do a few measures to see if we can't channel the water better so it does not inflict as much damage onto the lake. There is also a number of other work that's going to be needed to be done throughout the aqueduct. The aqueduct begins actually up in the Mono Basin and travels down through the Owens Valley and then off into Los Angeles. But in addition to the emergency measures required at Owens Lake, we're also going to take emergency action to armor to repair certain Los Angeles aqueduct facilities from floodwater impacts. We're going to need to clean, repair, and rebuild water conveyance facilities and delivery facilities of debris. We need to increase water storage at certain locations in our dams and reservoirs along the aqueduct. And we need to increase water flows in certain controlled waterways and construct flood control projects throughout the aqueduct system to mitigate any potential harm and maximize the amount of water that we deliver to Los Angeles. And so public safety is one of the core values at Water and Power. So there's really two things we're trying to protect here. Any damage to the aqueduct system, including the conveyance system itself and Owens Lake, and as well as working with our partners in Inyo and Mono County to reduce the amount of damage that may occur to the towns or the roads throughout the Owens Valley.
This does allow us to also then request the state for some funding assistance. And I will turn it back to Rich to just describe how, just because everyone knows about Oroville right now, and just kind of tie in a few facts and figures related to that.
Sure. So the aqueduct system is quite intricate, and I'll have you turn to the back side here, and there's a depiction of our aqueduct system, and there's a number of reservoirs on there, and really beginning at Lake Crowley and going down to North and South Haywee Reservoir Complex. There's a series of reservoirs there that we use to both collect water and be able to control the flow of water down through the aqueduct. Those are all along the aqueduct system. The main thing we're doing right now is lowering Lake Crowley, also known as Long Valley Reservoir, to capture as much water as we can when the runoff begins really in earnest in April. So those are significant reservoirs to us, but to give you an idea compared to Oroville, which has obviously been in the news, if you add up all of the capacity of our reservoirs along the upper aqueduct system here, it's only 7% of what Oroville holds. So it's not to say that these are not dams that in and of themselves could not have serious implications if they failed. We don't obviously intend for them to fail. We don't intend to spill over like you saw at Oroville. That may happen for a short period of time, but it's our intention to operate these in such a manner that they won't overspill. We don't lose the water at all in that, but the dams are designed to do that, but it's not the best operational procedure to allow them to spill for a continued period of time. And as David said, and I should have elaborated, so the proclamation does two things. It gives us that purchasing power here within the city, and then it also allows us to gain access to the assistance and cooperation of the state, and primarily state agencies that have regulatory powers over the department and really are going to need to work with us to be able to do some of the repair and prevention measures that we want to do.
I have several questions. So Annual County declared an emergency at the beginning of February. Why are we just considering doing so a month and a half later?
So Inyo County, I think, probably has, I was talking to their city administrator, they've done that one, and they probably have 3 or 4 more kind of up in the queue for specific things that happen to them. So they maybe have a creek or a stream that runs through and has some specific damage. So they'll do that. They're a little bit more nimble than what the city of Los Angeles can do in terms of a proclamation. So the question is, why are we doing this now? Well, any emergency that we're going to request assistance from the state has to happen basically within 10 days of the event. And so the way we tie that to the city of Los Angeles is when you look at that first graph that David had you look at, you can see the meteoric rise of the snow falling basically within January and February. And so what we did is we confirmed the depth of the snow that we had on February 1st. We take a February 1st snow survey, and then we took a March. And the March one confirmed that we were going to have record runoff. And then we verified those numbers. A little bit of calculation needs to go to. And then now we're within that 10-day window where we can request that assistance from the state. So along then, and then Inyo County, we believe, is going to issue a declaration that pretty much matches up with the intent of our declaration at their regularly scheduled meeting on next Tuesday.
Well, wasn't that already done on March 7th?
Like I said, they have done a number of.
So they did one on February. I'm just looking at their timeline. They did one on February 1st. Then on March 7th, they renewed the declaration of local emergency and amended it to add the DWP claim.
Okay, so that's good. They're a little bit more nimble than we are, and they maybe on their facilities and their towns are feeling the impacts of the storm ahead of us.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out your rationale. So if by March 7th, Inyo County is already amending and adding us to their declaration, why didn't we declare emergency declaration ourselves? Why is it a month and a half later?
Because we have.
You've measured the.
Right. So we're tying it to our March 1st snow survey, where we can confirm it. And so again, their damage may be coincident, but slightly different than any damages that we have or will foresee. So our declaration is along the aqueduct, which includes Owens Lake. Their emergency declaration will be for impacts to towns and roads within the county. Mm-hmm. But the two working together present a case that's strong to OES than to get financial assistance and governmental assistance from the state. So the state likes to see the geographic local area declare an emergency, and then for us to come in with ours for our asset that rests upon that geographic location is a stronger case.
And the assets you're referring to, are those the 85 power lines that were knocked down?
That would be our aqueduct system. So they had an event that impacted really their own town and their own county that was separate from any impacts to water and power. although due to the
confusing.
storms.
Hi, Bob. I want to note that Councilmember Blumenfield has just joined us. Thank you. I know we're tied up at budget together. So as I was, just to bring you up to speed, we're getting briefed on this morning's press conference regarding the proclamation of emergency. I don't know if you were briefed by the department, but I was, and I heard about it on Thursday.
I have not been briefed at all.
Okay, so welcome to the briefing. I have a question about the fact sheet. So after reading the fact sheet, it does seem that there's a threat to infrastructure, public property, and local government. Can you clarify in terms of what are our concerns in terms, I mean, are we talking about entire towns getting washed out? People's lives are in danger? Because it sort of reads that way. And I know there were some comments made earlier during the press conference about people's lives being endangered, and I don't want to create a false panic of any sort. I want to be very clear about what is it that
Sure.
that's really
So in
a
terms
threat,
of-
and not create the sense of panic if the nature of the emergency is different.
So the prime nature is of the threat of the emergency is the storm and the impending runoff due to all those snowstorms to water and power facilities along the aqueduct and within Owens Lake. There's such a great amount of runoff, and we essentially, although not responsible directly for flood control within the valley, since we control a lot of the water there, our efforts are helping to prevent any kind of wild runoff that would occur if we weren't there to control the flow of water. So if we aren't able to control the water in our normal course of tending ditches and streams and running those and controlling those to go in the aqueduct and go down to Los Angeles, if we aren't able to do that in a proper manner, then they would essentially run wild and into down roads, towns, and whatnot. So we're trying to control that in a manner that not only protects water and power facilities, but also protects towns and roads.
So we're not dealing with the Hurricane Katrina situation.
No, so it's really more if we see a train wreck happening in front of us and we're trying to mitigate it and control it as it happens. And so we use the term flood, but it's not necessarily a wall of water that's coming down. It's going to be this just great volume of water that's going to be coming in a concentrated manner.
And I wanted to add, I did hear from staff that was tracking the emergency declarations, and Inyo County's first declaration in February had a huge boulder that blocked the road to a portion of their town and was not related to any of the DWP facilities.
So it only relates to DWP when they amended their declaration on March 7th. Okay. Members, do you have any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for pulling this briefing together. Appreciate it very much. Some questions based on your presentation. So 75% you predict of LA water will be from the aqueduct this year because of this extraordinary circumstance.
Correct.
What's the normal percentage of aqueduct water? I should know this, but I don't. In a normal year, which normal is drought?
Yeah, so it's been difficult to say what's normal's been for the past 6 years, but it's become, during that period of time, I would say our average was,
The average is about 35%.
35%. So it's
Interesting.
been really low. Traditionally, it's been high. Like when I first started water power 32 years ago, it was about 70% all the time. And just because of certain court decisions, Owens Lake being one of them,
Right.
long-term water agreement, Monolake agreement, that ability to bring down that amount of water has been reduced. So we're at 50% probably at best in the long term.
And changes in weather patterns as well, right? Climate change, et cetera. So 241% over the last year in terms of snowpack.
241% of normal what would be this year.
Right,
And normal is that just kind of pyramid shape on it.
right, okay. And then I think this next question that I had is already answered. How deep the water could get in the dust mitigation areas, and it looks like it's 7 feet according to your report.
Yes, I don't think I said that, but yes, that would be.
And then in terms of some of the anticipated damage is also listed in the report. Is that damage absolute? So for example, if the water is 5 5 to 7 to 10 feet deep. How long would it need to be at that level before it completely, deteriorates all the infrastructure that has been laid down over the past several years because of the court settlement? When will we have a sense of the damage, in other words?
Sure, so the water's already kind of backed up to the backside of our berms at this point, so we know that there'll be some level of damage. And that first level damage is going to be those the berms that are along the water line now. And those will be the first to go. And once those go, then it'll rush in, and whether we have managed vegetation, it'll probably kill that vegetation to about 4 square miles of that. Portion of that will be taken out. And then we've got buried infrastructure that may get filled with sediments and otherwise just damage. So we know the aerial extent of the damage, and we know wherever we have formed land, either in berms or tilled up the land or otherwise moved it, will be completely wiped out. And to go back in there and level it out again will be essentially a rebuild. I should mention, if the question's asked, how are we going to pay for this? We have a long-term plan, which we call the master project, that we've been working on for probably a couple of years right now, where we've been working with all the relevant state agencies and folks that are interested with our project, the tribal interests, Audubon, et cetera. The master project seeks to really reimagine and rebuild Owens Lake such that we use less water, freeing up more water to go to the city of Los Angeles, while still maintaining dust control and maintaining the habitat that's up there. So there's already funds set aside, about $1.5 billion within the current rate case, that will pay for that over a 7-year period. And so any damage that we have to these areas will be paid out of the existing funds. So there should be no rate impact because of this. We will seek assistance from the state monetary systems, and if the governor seeks federal assistance, we'll get FEMA, or I should say we'll seek FEMA assistance. And then we also have insurance policies at Water and Power. So financially, it's a better case.
At what point might I-395, is it 395?
395.
At what point might it be underwater? How deep does the water have to get before parts of 395 are underwater?
We wouldn't imagine, not because of Owens Lake. What the worst case scenario would be really, I talked about the total volume of water, 500,000, that's still going to be up in the Owens Valley. There's also a timing impact to that. So if there was a sudden melt-off because of a unusual spring weather, then you could have, and we've seen it basically, a flash flood coming down maybe a creek or a stream, overtopping our aqueduct. We do channelize the water to go over the aqueduct. At times in our history, we've had that rush over the aqueduct and then spread water and debris onto 395. So that's happened a few times just with normal course of weather. So that is a likely scenario. That's one of the things that we're looking to be able to respond quickly. So the emergency purchasing power allows us to quickly get equipment and materials to clean up that.
That was one of my questions in terms of...
You're not going to see in really any case, a flooding of the town and houses being, floated away, anything like that.
Right. It depends on weather patterns and how quick the temperature change will be and how long it lasts, et cetera. And so, Mr. Wright, you mentioned something about purchasing. In your opening remarks, you mentioned purchasing. And sorry, I don't remember specifically what it was about, but can you elaborate on that?
It was basically just what Rich said, our procurement efforts, purchasing and procurement of services, emergency materials and supplies, and
Now, this
bulldozers. And
declaration frees you up.
Correct,
for
correct,
that.
to get that so we can respond immediately.
And you'll have, maybe you do in the report, but you'll have more or less an itemized list of what all that purchasing will
Yes, we will.
require?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So now that the state and the federal government have declared emergencies, it does probably make sense for us to do the same. Does the department have an anticipated list of projects that you will propose for the emergency relief?
Well, we have a couple of initial projects and really a couple initial operations that will need state assistance. So one of those is that reservoir that's at the top of the aqueduct there.
The one you mentioned on the diagram?
Yeah, Lake Crowley and Long Valley Reservoir.
Say it again, which one?
So on this picture here,
Oh,
as the length of the
Lake Crowley?
aqueduct, Lake Crowley, there's a dam there, and we have a series of power plants underneath that. So we want to be able to avoid spilling that reservoir because there's a protected species of fish. So we may need some state waivers to operate that system in a certain way. There's also a couple of the reservoirs along there that we would want to operate at a higher than normally allowed elevation. And so we're going to seek assistance and cooperation from the State Department of Division of Dams to help us to do that. And then Owens Lake, the initial project we want to do is to basically channelize the Owens Lake Delta, which is just upstream of the lake itself, to channelize the water to do as little damage to the delta and create even more, or I should say newer dust areas, and try to channelize it to get it into the lake itself without doing damage to our dust control measures.
Excuse me, Madam Chair,
Sure.
does that involve digging new trenches, like really quickly?
Correct.
How big and deep?
We're still working it out. Again, part of that is working with like Fish and Game and the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board, because right now we need permits. What we seek from the state is possibly getting them to waive some of their normal conditions so we could go in there quickly and maybe deeper and wider than we normally would. But those specifics are being worked out right now.
And so are the listed projects only, will only be benefiting or protecting the city of LA's interest, or will we be supporting the interest of Inyo County
Sure. So
and other environmental or affected wildlife in that area?
right. So with or without the proclamation, we've already been working with Inyo County. In fact, just Thursday, Jim, or Wednesday?
Last Wednesday, we had an interagency meeting with all the agencies up north.
So we're part of the community up there, and we work, every month, every year with the county, whether it's for fires or flood control or whatnot. So that always happens. What the emergency declaration will allow us to, again, is either to get materials or equipment or waive certain regulatory requirements in us to be able to either clean out ditches or streams or do work on Owens Lake.
And what are the implications to the ratepayer here in LA?
So hopefully, because of the budget additions we've made to rebuild Owens Lake into the master project, we already have funds there to really reimagine and rebuild the entire lake over probably a 7-year period of time. So we have $1.5 billion already set aside to rebuild the lake, and we can repurpose those then to rebuild any areas that were damaged by any flooding on Owens Lake. And then we'll also seek assistance from the state and federal government, as well as we do have insurance policies that we can tap into to help us. So the net effect should be that there is no rate implication to our ratepayers.
Okay. Mr. Blumenford, do you have any questions?
Yeah, following up on that question, the rates won't change, but if we're using much more of this water versus, isn't this the cheapest water for ratepayers? So in effect, won't
Our rates go down?
the average, well, our rates won't go down, but the actual money that somebody's paying for the same amount of water should go down, right?
So, yeah, we're maximizing the amount of water we're going to bring to Los Angeles. So this will be, the greatest amount really that we can serve of aqueduct water, which means we don't have to purchase water from the Metropolitan Water District. Now, that's just a pass-through. So the net effect is if we were going to have a dry year like we had last year, and really what was predicted all the way up into December, our ratepayers would have had to have spent $165 million on purchase water. That's what our plans were.
Right.
So they will not have to pay that amount. They'll pay the cheaper amount for aqueduct water. And so that's just money they don't have to pay. It's not like money we collect and can give back. They just don't.
Right, but from it's not necessarily the good news in terms of this, but from the ratepayer's pocketbook, the average Joe and Jane at their house, they're going to be paying less money in water this next few months because it's cheaper water. So is that not a fair statement to make?
That's a fair statement.
Yeah, and so that's a positive.
Yes.
A silver lining in a dark cloud, I guess you could say.
It's the lemonade with the lemons we're dealt with.
For this. And speaking of sort of lemonades on this, there's a little counter. And that's great news for folks who've been suffering in the valley. They'll have to pay less. But it's a little counterintuitive in some ways because we have all this excess water now. We've been suffering in Owens Valley because we've had all the dust because there's been no water. So now we have all the water, and we're worried about the impacts because as I understand it, the berms and all the dust mitigation stuff is going to be kind of washed away. But it's not a problem until that 12 to 18 months when that starts to evaporate.
Correct.
And if rain were to continue next year, if we didn't have another drought year for a while, then it wouldn't be a problem for a while. And in fact, we should be saving money every year on not having to do those drought mitigations. And I know we're not. I mean, I get the fact that this is costing us money, but the counterintuitive part is usually when you throw water on something, what comes out of that after a big flood is you see much more green, and that's the natural. Those are the mitigations that we're
Yeah.
fighting. A lot of the dust mitigation is basically planting and watering, right?
It's mostly watering, and there is some vegetation on there. The flood water that's going to go in there is going to mix up though with the just hypersaline water that's in that. It's called the Owens Lake Brine Pool. It's actually a 30 square mile brine pool,
Right.
and that's going to get pushed out in there. So any vegetation we have will die off, and then as the water recedes, it's really already salty soil, if you will. So it won't necessarily change the chemistry, but it may reintroduce more emissive conditions.
And there's no way to cordon off some of the, to avoid that extra saline situation happening, to cordon off some of the fresh water somehow.
No, and in terms of dust control measures, saline water is not an enemy. In fact, it's a friend because it does evaporate a lot slower. And if we actually can concentrate that water, we can actually make a brine, which is a dust control measure of itself. It's basically we're making salt rock out there.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like in a
It's
weird way, this is what we've wanted. We've wanted water there so that we could do all this stuff, and now we get the water, and it costs us.
It just damages the facilities to
It's
capture
just too
the
much,
water.
Careful what
too
you
much,
ask for.
too much, too fast. Which is probably. And looking at your sheet, it says, given the abundance, is LA still in a drought? And I read the paragraph, and it doesn't actually answer that question. It just says, look out, we're not out of the woods because, understandably, we got long-term issues. But technically speaking, this year, are we still in a drought?
David loves answering this question.
Yeah.
One year doesn't make a drought, and 1 year of heavy rain does not make the elimination of a drought. We need a couple more years of this before we can say, okay, we've refilled our groundwater base and we've got plenty of water supply. The long-term message is the same, that we have to reduce the water we use per person, per household, forever. There is a lot of climate change science that's saying that we are going to go through more periods like this where it's really dry and then really wet, which is some of that $1.5 billion that Rich is talking about to try and set up to handle that. But like I said, it is kind of weird to look at that red line and see how we went from one of the driest years. I mean, that's not like a gentle slope. That's like the face of El Capitan,
It's feast and famine, and we're feasting on all of our water storage, right? It's just the groundwater and the stuff that percolates and takes longer we're still not.
We are, as a water system, though, looking at how, when there are those couple years of feast, that we can save more, recharge more, utilize more. It's just unfortunate this year. It's I don't want to say it's a wall of water coming at us, because that's a horrible metaphor, but it's a lot of stuff too fast, too quickly.
And I assume, does this change our strategy for mitigating Owens Valley in terms of the way we think about, how to go about these mitigations?
Well, we've got, two major things going on in Owens Valley. One is just mitigating our pumping of groundwater. So this will help tremendously because to spread, I think, about 160,000 acre-feet of water just on the land, and hopefully we'll get most of that back and recharging that groundwater basin. Because that's the thing we measure year to year that determines how much we can export out of the valley. So we're going to see some long-term benefits in that regard here. And then the other place where we have issues in the Owens Valley we have to mitigate is Owens Lake. So there is a normal amount of water that we put onto Owens Lake for dust control. So in a sense, we have an excess amount. And so that's not really coming out of the water that would normally go to Los Angeles. So for this year, it's, I don't know, free is really the right short-term benefit there on Owens Lake in terms of the water reuse, and there's a long-term benefit in terms of our groundwater stability.
One final thing, if this gets approved by council, we have to bring it back by state requirement every couple of weeks. It has to be reaffirmed, so you will see it, and if next year's really really wet, you could see this being reaffirmed on an ongoing basis until weather dries up a little bit.
Well, as you can see, briefing this committee shouldn't be that complicated. I know we're all very busy, but the consideration of a declaration of emergency is a major issue, and I certainly see it that way. And I think members of this committee deserve a little bit more respect than that, than reading, than having to see it on the news or reading a press advisory to be informed of what's happening. To my knowledge, I had never seen this item agendized at the DWP Commission agenda. I don't think that was brought to them as, I didn't see it on any of their agenda items. I think our staff reached out to make sure that we were correct on that. And there was no communication to the city council or to the council president in terms of this declaration as well. And as far as I can tell on the timeline, Inyo County had been having these discussions on the weather impacts since the beginning of February, if not sooner. So I just want to make sure that we just figure out a better way to communicate with the members of this committee. This wasn't, today's meeting didn't necessarily have anything agendized besides getting a briefing from the department, but I do want to request that the CLA work with DWP and the CAO's office and prepare a resolution for introduction in the city council this week, declaring an emergency in the Owens Valley. I want to be able to do that, and also direct DWP to provide a written report to council president, the chair of this committee, and the ratepayer advocate on the protocols and process moving forward that ensures a timely communication when DWP has concerns, perceived or real, of threats to public safety and property. Okay? Does anybody object? No? Any other questions, members? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes our meeting.